brought more bottles into the studio. More science with bottles. Oh,
hang on. I've got a Twitter. Hold on just 1 second. One more little tweet. And Kubrick's not going to catch on fire. Go. Perfect. God. Yeah,
there it is.
Actually, Twitter. This is from a second grade teacher over at Wilder. She writes, Steve Spangler, I'm a teacher who watches 9 News, and I want to know if I can have some help with that egg in the bottle trick.
Oh,
this is where
egg in the bottle trick.
Here's what's so cool about it. Teachers are turning to Twitter, parents, a lot of people turning to Twitter to just ask for advice. Isn't that the kind of the science of the social network?
Yeah, I'll bet you get a lot of them.
There are a couple followers, and so I got this last night, and I thought, we got to do this today.
All right.
Not? So not only is she watching, she'll be ready for her back to school night. All right. This is the classic egg in the bottle. It's hard to do now because it's hard to find these bottles. They just don't have milk bottles.
Right.
So you got to head down to Antique Row and see if you can find some old milk bottles.
South Broadway. Sure.
Yeah,
you
so
can find
maybe a good way to be able to do it.
Yeah.
All right. So the object is this: you're trying to get the egg in the bottle, and I always forget to tell people this is a hard-boiled egg. Right, so and you take the shell off the hard-boiled egg. I forgot to tell them that
years ago.
Make it
more pliable, yes.
You got it. All right, so there's the hard-boiled egg, and of course the egg does not go into the bottle. That's really important. Early
and have you done olive oil or butter or anything?
You know what I did is I did a little bit of oil on there, so that was it. So I just wanted a little slippery. Still, I can't push it down inside. All right, so here's what we're going to try to do. This is, and it doesn't always work, so we cross our fingers that it actually works on this one. What we're going to do is we're going to use fire because I know that, of course you love that. All right, so here's what we're going to do. And if we miss it once, and there's no holes in this suit, but that's a little time.
I should have worn one of the old suits, but no.
So we're going to catch this on fire. We put it down inside here like this, so this is about the size. All right, so that's about perfect.
Okay.
This is now going to heat all the air inside. And as soon as the air gets hot, we'll put the egg on top. And when the egg goes on top, you're going to see a little fluttering. And then that's because the hot air is trying to escape. Then it's going to go out. The fire will go out. And the air pressure on the outside will be greater. And hopefully it'll push it in.
Pull the egg in.
So we don't say the egg gets sucked in.
Oh,
right? No. So here, I'll control fire. You control this.
I'm sort of in charge of the wick.
Yes.
Does it go burning part down?
Yes, burning part down.
All right.
But we're going to let it burn here for just a second. So let it burn for a second.
Of course we are, because I'm holding
it. Okay, now put it down inside. I think that'd be good. Yep, down inside would be great. So there it goes, there it goes. This is on top. See it flutter.
And thank you!
I
love it when it works.
That's the intricacy. It smells so great here.
Oh, it does. It smells good.
And there it is, the egg in the bottle. All right, so once again, the secret is that you want to find an air.
Too, I'd like to point.
Well, that'll be the secret for trying to get it back out again, all right? So again, paper not too big, and sometimes teachers will try to do it 2 or 3 times. The byproduct that's in there is carbon dioxide, so if I try to do it again, the same bottle not going to work so well. So again, if you got 1 bottle, why not buy 2 bottles, so that at least you can do it.
Does this go into the new bottle?
That's going to go into the new bottle. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay. You can actually see the fluttering if you missed it that first. Oh, there it is. Watch this. See the fluttering there? See it there?
Yes,
see it? Now, outside pressure greter than the inside.
And number 2.
Isn't that beautiful? Now, here's the hard part. The hard part is trying to get it back out again. And because you've got many newscasts to do, I'll go ahead and suffer and do this. You push air inside here.
Oh, you're going to blow into the
So it's like a one-way valve.
All right.
Ready? So
I'm ready.
Like, nice. No, it's you play that way. I'll try to get this one. See, it did come out. I'm used to it not coming out. So it actually worked. Ready?
And thank you. High five. A little link for you
thanks,
there.
Twitter brought you today's segment, and I'll
one.
make sure that the link is up here. So it's just Steve Spangler on Twitter, and they've got all that on the 9 News website.
Ladies and gentlemen, the GS112, welcome to your final video lecture. Keep in mind, you all should be turning in your final reading assignment tonight, which is Friday. And then on Monday, you're going to be turning in your final homework questions. On Wednesday, you'll be taking your final exam, which, by the way, is not cumulative. So don't forget to do all those things. For this very last day, I decided to just kind of have a little bit of fun and talk about something that I hold, relatively close to my heart, just because my dad is, in fact, a Sasquatch person, really believes in Sasquatch. So in our products of science, quote unquote, we'll be talking about Sasquatch to kind of end things. If you don't know it already, that's one thing that my dad is really excited about every time he talks to me. The fact is that most of the Sasquatch sightings are really in the Pacific Northwest, and we are smack dab in the middle of Sasquatch country. So those of you that have never heard of Sasquatch, come on, get with it. Sasquatch is thought to be a giant ape living among us, essentially. And it is it essentially looks like a giant, hairy, kind of ape-like man who is supposed to be friendly but very reclusive. And so only very recently, this would be considered completely a topic of pseudoscience, which we talked about last week. But pretty recently, some pretty brave and I will say definitely open-minded scientific individuals are trying to apply the principles of science to this age-old idea. And I'll be honest, I used to think my dad was crazy, and I actually went to a Sasquatch convention as a scientist, just mostly as a joke. And I started listening to a particular individual, and they were very convincing. Let's just leave it at that. But I'll kind of talk a little bit about that individual and a little bit about some of the research he showed. So one of the first things that really isn't, I guess, necessarily scientific, but more anthropological, is this idea that a creature that exists in the woods, this idea of like a wild man of the woods or hairy wild man of the woods, has been around for a long, long time, especially in the Pacific Northwest. It's a pretty common idea among many of the First Nations people. Even the word Sasquatch is kind of an anglicized version of this word, which I won't pretend to be able to pronounce, from a particular tribe named the Coast Sasku, which are in British Columbia. And then all around this area, there are other tribes that had this hairy person in their kind of oral history. And there's also many examples of artwork, believe it or not. This is supposed to be a Sasquatch family. This was in a place called Painted Rocks, which is kind of near Fresno, out in the kind of a wild place, not too close to Fresno. I'm pretty sure they're not living downtown. Here is just kind of a line drawing of the dad Sasquatch that is right here. This is just kind of an example of many, many, many things I could have shown. This has been something that's been around for a heck of a lot longer than we have, at least. And this was the individual that really started to, at least, I won't say I necessarily believe, but I'm at least open to the possibility, let's say. A lot of the empirical evidence is pretty scant, and a lot of scientists, I must admit, feel similar to the way that I feel. It's just that it's rare that anybody is able to have enough, I guess, chutzpah to actually say, yes, I believe, and isn't afraid to be a part of the scientific community and say that. So this person is not as wimpy as I am. This is a professor of anatomy and anthropology that I heard speak at the, I think it was the second annual National Sasquatch Convention, which happened strangely in Oregon. And so this is Jeff Meldrum. He's written a ton of books, and really he's probably the number one researcher right now that's kind of a part of the actual scientific establishment and has scientific credentials. He wasn't, however, the first. It turns out the first was this individual named Grover Krantz, who was just a really dynamic person. Say what you want about Sasquatch. This guy was an original dude. He was an anthropologist and called himself, actually, I believe, coined the term cryptozoologist, this idea of being a zoologist of kind of a hidden creature. He was really the first scientist that announced his belief in Bigfoot publicly. And the reason that I learned about him, actually, of course, Dr. Meldrum mentioned him in a few of his lecture slides, but I didn't really catch on at that point. But there's a really spectacular podcast called Wild Thing that's put together by a relative of his, like a very distant relative named Laura Krantz. But she put together just, I think, probably one of the best podcasts that's out there, all having to do with both the kind of the campy sides of Sasquatch and then also the, quote unquote, purely scientific side. And she actually is able to go out on various Sasquatch hunts for other researchers in the field that kind of go out and do this kind of thing. And I just had to include this image. It turns out that Grover Krantz, actually, he was a teacher through and through, and he actually in his will said that he needed to be buried with his dogs, and so we did him one better by actually putting the real bones of his dog and his real bones on display in the Smithsonian. As I said, he was a scientist, very very iconoclastic, but good old Grover here is somebody you can see in the Smithsonian now. In keeping with those 7 pieces of the scientific principles, what must be true if something is truly going to be science? First of all, we have to have some sort of falsifiable hypothesis, and we also, as an important part, have to have some sort of empirical evidence. So I will say that it is undoubtedly true that the empirical evidence, in other words, like the hard physical evidence of the existence of a wild man of the woods, is pretty limited. What we have a lot of, though, are footprint photos and also many, many casts that I'm going to leave in. I'm going to let you watch like a 5-minute NPR special as kind of like my parting shot here. So you'll kind of see some of those in just a second. And the big problem is that there are many obvious fakes in the cast world. But there are some that show a whole bunch of detail that, a lot of research has gone into trying to, show that it's at least plausible that these are real things. And then there are, of course, just tons of obvious fakes out there. One of the most interesting talks I went to when I was at the symposium was from a cryptolinguist that did a bunch of work with the Navy. And he actually had a recording of a bunch of what's thought to be Sasquatch vocalizations, and had easily, I've been to a lot of seminars in my life, and that was just mind-boggling. And I unfortunately can't remember the name of the individual that did it. But there's, according to my dad, all kinds of obvious examples of the Sasquatch existence that include tree knocking. And apparently, if you believe my dad again, you would also know that Sasquatch likes to build these really odd tree-leaning structures that he's convinced that he's found on a regular basis. And also, there are quite a few vocalization vocalization audio clips. And believe it or not, very recently, there's been kind of an uptick in the discovery of supposedly Sasquatch nests. Unfortunately, not surprisingly, a lot of these actually turned out to be some sort of black bear nests, and they now have the ability to use DNA evidence, and so far every nest that's been found has actually been linked to bears, or just somebody screwing with somebody else. So I can't leave you without talking about a really particular film, which is one of the eyewitness accounts that was caught on video. Of course, there's tons of these out here, tons of fakes and everything else, but there's this really curious one. Any talk of Sasquatch wouldn't be complete without discussing the Patterson-Gimlin film from the early 60s. These were 2 ranchers that were out in the middle of Northern California, and they filmed pretty much the prototypical, like if we've seen any kind of Sasquatch memorabilia, it's pretty much from this film. The curious thing about it is, even though it was subjected to many different technological analyses, including modern day, it really seems to stand up to exhaustive analysis. And when I let you watch this final movie of the term here in just a couple of seconds, there's actually, I guess, somebody that admitted to being in like a gorilla suit that passed the lie detector test. And throughout the ages, everybody has been kind of looking for the person that was wearing the suit. And I kind of went to my own conference thinking about this thing and about to debunk it. And it was actually interesting to hear Jeff Medlum talk about some of the things that makes him think that this thing might be real. And I got to admit, he was pretty convincing. And luckily, I found a clip where he's also included. So here's a link if you'd like to watch it yourself. I'm not sure the audio quality is so good. We'll click on that, and that'll be the final thing of the year. But before I leave you all, I just wanted to show you this kind of heat map of Sasquatch sightings. And there is a curious, very, very bright area over here, roundabout Washington, and a whole bunch in Oregon. So, my parting words, if any of you find empirical evidence for Sasquatch, you know who to contact. It's been fun, everybody. Take care.
A half-century ago, two former rodeo men went into the woods with a 16mm camera and stumbled on Bigfoot.
When she's walking across a sandbar and spreads her arms out and looks at the camera, frame 352, that's become the Bigfoot icon for our culture.
The sighting of Patty, as she would later be known, at Bluff Creek in California is one of the most famous reels in film history. Before the Patterson-Gimlin film, named after its makers, the Sasquatch was a local Northwest legend. After, Bigfoot became an international celebrity. But look at this clip from the 2017 movie War for the Planet of the Apes. I mean, it's obvious now with the leaps in film and costume technology that this is just someone in an ape suit, right? A guy even passed a lie detector test on national TV, claiming he wore the suit.
About whether you were the Bigfoot shown in the 1967 Patterson film. Yes.
But the film continues to fascinate people. How confident are you this film's real?
At this point, I'm as confident as I can be, short of having stood on the sandbar with Roger and Bob and witnessed it myself.
That's Jeff Meldrum, a professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State. He's known for being one of the few academics to openly study Sasquatch. For Bigfooters around the world, the Patterson-Gimlin film is not only real, it's one of the strongest pieces of evidence of the existence of an undiscovered giant walking ape on the planet. Still, 50 years later, the film is yet to be officially debunked. So, how is this not a person wearing an ape suit?
It's all so easy to say, oh, that's obviously a man in a fur suit, until you see it up against a man in a fur suit.
He points to the Planet of the Apes franchise that came out around the same time as the film and won an Oscar for the makeup. He specifically calls up a scene in the sauna in the 1970 sequel Beneath the Planet of the Apes.
They look like big, hairy Pillsbury Doughboys.
Jeff Meldrum compares it to the Patterson-Gimlin film, which he shows to his anatomy students. I'm also including some stabilized footage from a Reddit user that helps illustrate Jeff's point.
Say, all right, I want you to point out as many landmarks of surface anatomy and muscle masses that you can identify. And they start at the head, and they can see the trapezius, they can see the deltoid, they can see the lateral and long heads of the triceps. You can see the erector spinae down the back. You can see the shoulder blades moving under the skin. I mean, just go on and on from top to bottom. You can pick out all these features, none of which ever show up in a cheap off-the-shelf costume.
Costume manufacturer Philip Morris claimed just that in this video. He gave talks about how he sold Patterson the suit worn in the film. But the most relevant proof of Bigfoot's existence for some serious researchers isn't easily captured on film. It's what the Sasquatch leaves behind. Cliff Barackman has one of the largest collections of Sasquatch footprints in the world. You might recognize Cliff as the co-host of Animal Planet's Finding Bigfoot. He's seen a lot of fake prints, but says the Patterson-Gimlin ones aren't so easily dismissed.
The trailing leg of the creature also shows the flexibility in the mid part of the foot. There are a few frames there where we see Patty take her heel off the ground but yet keep the entire forefoot in touch with the ground.
Along with the footage of Patty was a clear track of footprints.
One of them showed a very distinctive pressure ridge, a push-off that comes about as a result of the very flexible midfoot.
This distinct characteristic is a smoking gun for Jeff. He's seen that pressure ridge in foot samples across decades and continents. But both Jeff and Cliff admit that until there's a body, then the film and all the research will be up for debate. If it's a guy in a suit, the Patterson-Gimlin film is one of the great hoaxes of all time. If it's not, the film would completely upend everything we understand about apes and evolution. Either way, the Patterson-Gimlin film turned a Northwest local legend into a global icon. And it's endured because it reminds us There are some things in the world we can never know for sure. Hey, I'm John. I made the video. If you want to see more like it, go to opb.org/video or like us on Facebook. Thanks for watching.